Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa, Motorsport, and ScooterWest.com. So if you're looking for parts for something like this, a vintage P200, or you have a modern Vespa, you know where to go, ScooterWest.com. So this is the last video of the several week-long engine overhaul project of this vintage P200. And I said I had one more thing, and I added something magical to the scooter. So I'm gonna just pretty much go over everything that I had to do to add that magical button that's located right here, and add the electric start. And I'll tell you right now, it's not easy. So yeah, you might start with the new engine case that have the spot for an electric start, but there's quite a few modifications. So I redid the job. Sorry I couldn't cover it all in the camera. There was a lot of pretty tedious work to get this last part, the electric start, all installed, but pretty much had to run some extra wiring all the way down the frame. But let's get right to it. I'll show you everything I did. All right, wait, one more thing. I gotta show that it starts. So let's turn the fuel on. That's not automatic. Got the choke. The vintage Vespa key here. And let's see what happens. So there you go, electric start. So you got the vintage bike with the modern convenience now. Starting with electric start install, well, what do you need first? You need the electric start. So we already know the engine cases were engineered for the electric start. So I have the starter motors mounted to the back of the motor. And the way this works is it's got a planetary, or not a planetary gear, it's got a bevel drive gear, and it's got a Bendix gear on the end. So it takes the starter motor that's up and down and turns it into like a horizontal spinning motion. And it's got that Bendix gear that pops out and engages on the teeth of the flywheel. So it's got the specific PX flywheel. I got the starter motor mounted to the motor. Normally they have 8mm studs on the engine case, and you can access the bolts. I made it a little more up to date. So I used Allen headed screws with Nordlock washers that lock in place. So it's pretty much 3 8mm hex head screws, or Allen head screws, holding the starter motor to the engine case. So you can see there's some extra wiring that I've added. I'll talk about that shortly, but there's one thing you gotta do to the frame. You gotta get a little medieval if you're installing this on a vintage Vespa frame. I've done this setup on, I think it was a GS with a sidecar, and I remember having to very carefully cut the frame to make it look very nice. Kind of a sad thing to do on that era of a scooter nowadays, but that was nearly 20 years ago that I did that project. But they have this little ledge right here, and you're gonna need to bend that up because it will come in contact with that positive terminal. And then you can see the frame is kind of sculpted in there. So I used a ball peen hammer and kind of shaped this shock tower section that's stamped into the steel, kind of concaved it in so it will miss the starter motor. It still comes in pretty close clearance to the starter motor, but if you look at a PX from 1985 and later, all this has been re-engineered in the actual tool that stamps out the sheet metal for the frame to accommodate the starter motor. So moving on to the flywheel, it's got that ring gear on the outside. I kind of showed that when I was setting the timing and assembling the motor. I already had that on there. I have a different style fan cover that's specific for the PX. You can see it kind of has a larger hump right here that allows for that Bendix gear to pop out of the starter motor. And if you see the wiring, you have the positive wire and I got a negative wire. I went one size larger. I think I got 6 gauge wire instead of the normal, I think it's 8 gauge wires. Nice thick marine grade insulated wire. I have a hydraulic crimper that does those really large lug terminals. So some of this stuff definitely isn't just the normal do-it-yourself kind of work to fabricate a harness to adopt a electric start to an older Vespa. But as you can see, it's totally possible. It's got the PX style junction box, and of course I have the bracket that's specific for the PX for that ignition box right there. So the positive, and also a much heavier duty ground wire that bolts to that one lug. I drilled 2 extra holes and added 2 rubber grommets, so this wiring goes right into the frame here, and it passes on to the left side where the battery is. All right, so we're on the left side right here. I'll go ahead and pull the spare just to show you everything that's going on. So I already have the larger capacity battery. This is the fully sealed version of the YTX or YB9B battery. It's a BB9B. We have those available on the Scooter West web store. It's a nice upgrade even for the older Vespas that don't have electric start, just because it's a sealed battery that has extra reserve capacity. I have the longer battery strap that's specific on the PX. You gotta be careful when removing the spare tire with that positive terminal nice and close. Don't want to arc that to that bolt right there. Maybe better yet, just disconnect the battery terminal. So we'll get this out of the way. And what can you see? That's the original wiring harness for this old P200E. And my preference a lot of times is to repair old original wiring harnesses versus run a whole new wiring harness. Obviously that's an option. We do have the wiring harness available for this era of American specification P200E. But I just pretty much added to it. So you can see 2 extra grommets right here, right next to where the main wiring harness, and that's where the pair of 6-gauge electric start wiring passes through the frame. So the ground comes right down here. Can't really see it, but it has a pretty large sized lug that's on top of the voltage regulator, and then it loops back up here, and I crimped another rather large size lug to that 1/4-inch terminal for your negative. And then the positive, I have the existing fused 7.5 amp or 8 amp circuit on the original one. I replaced that with a blade fuse years ago, kind of more reliable than the old German European style fuse that they originally had. And then there's the positive wire. It routes down here and it's got an insulated terminal, and this is the electric start relay that's used on pretty much all modern Vespas. Nice compact size relay, and I have pretty much the power from the battery going in, and then you have the switch terminal going to the other side, and then there's 2 additional terminals on the starter relay. So you see this white wire, it goes through a small grommet right here. It passes on to, there's a white wire at your turn signal flasher. Whenever you have the ignition on, this goes positive. And then there's a small gray wire right here that runs through the frame all the way up to this electric start button. And this is attached with 2 small screws. I drilled 2 holes and tapped them to attach this little button right here. You can see it doesn't operate when the ignition switch is off. But there's 1 wire that goes to the ground at the junction box in the front, just behind the horn cover. And the other wire has a connection so you could remove the button if needed, or the whole switch that goes to this gray wire. There's one thing I did not include with this that's probably a good idea, is you could put a clutch safety switch or a neutral switch on here, but I think common sense kind of goes a long way. Pretty much right now, if you have it in gear and you push the electric start, it's going to be the same thing as trying to kick over a bike in gear. It's going to want to lunge forward. So keep that in mind if you're doing a conversion like this. If you want to make it a little safer, you could add the extra grounding switch that's for the clutch. So it pretty much requires you to pull the clutch in to start it. But that pretty much is what it took to install the electric start. The charging system on this era of P200E is perfectly adequate to keep this battery topped off, since the electric start's just an intermittent load. But it's a pretty handy feature to have. Definitely makes it more of a lazy man's kind of scooter now. You just push a button like anything modern and it starts right up. You still got the manual choke and fuel tap, but kind of brings it up to the modern spec. All right, so that's pretty much it. I'll put the cowls on. I've already taken the scooter on a couple test rides, probably make a couple little adjustments. I'll likely change the gear oil after 100 or so miles just because it's a new engine case and might have little fragments. But it was a fun build. Taking up the lift here at the Vespa Motorsport service department in the way of all my techs for about 6 weeks, because that's how long it took me to put together this video, all the different parts. Obviously, if you're doing it yourself and you have all the parts at your disposal, it's probably only a couple-day job to complete, or a couple nights, I guess. You know, one of my techs would probably just do it in one day. So thanks for watching. Again, I like using the handy knife key. That works perfect for this old bike that doesn't even have any pins left in the tumbler. There you go. See you on the next one.